Welcome along, my aspiring allies, and thank you for joining me on this most recent episode of the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. Today, I am joined by Sharon Hurley Hall, and I had to really stop myself fangirling at this because I have been a super fan of Sharon's for quite some time now. I'm a regular subscriber to her newsletter, which is why we have ended up managing to get her booked on the podcast. So I'm absolutely delighted to bring this conversation that Sharon and I have had. Sharon Hurley Hall is an author, educator, and anti-racism activist. She is a journalist, or former journalist, I should say, and author. And her book, I'm Tired of Racism, subtitle True Stories of Existing While Black and Exploring Shadism, is something that we do kind of touch upon within our conversation. A lot of the content that we get into is talking about colorism and anti-racism. You would be unsurprised to learn, knowing that that is her specialism. She is the founder of Sharon's anti-racism newsletter, so that is something I will definitely have a link to in the show notes for you to go along and subscribe to. I thoroughly recommend it. I use her content for a lot of information and learning, and she's incredibly insightful. And this conversation was no exception. We explored all kinds of different things related to anti-racism and anti-Blackness, including the fact that race and racialization is a concept that is all made up. So I look forward to you having a listen to this and really kind of hopefully coming along with us for the journey. But I'm really interested in your thoughts and what stands out for you as you listen to this, especially if you are someone who is racialized as white, because this can often be something that is a topic that's a bit uncomfortable for us. So we're here for this journey and we're here for the learning. So without further ado, you know the drill. Sit back, relax, and get comfortable in whichever way works best for you. And please welcome Sharon Hurley Hall to the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. I'm trying to think. Do you know, actually, someone asked me, I don't know. It was such a funny question, but they asked me at the start of a podcast, when you peg socks on a washing line, do you fold the whole sock over and put the peg on, or do you just peg like one half of the sock?
Oh, I usually peg one half of the sock
Yeah.
unless it's a really thick sock, in which case I'll just, no, I think I usually I don't think I fold the whole thing over.
Yeah.
I
I
don't.
I
I don't
I I
know.
was kind of
It's been a
I did
while.
exactly what you're doing. I was like, I don't know, it's socks. Who thinks about that?
Actually, I did fold them over, but with thicker socks, I peg one half. That's
That
what I
makes
do.
sense because of the
Yes,
girth challenge.
because yeah, otherwise they don't dry.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. This was
Yeah,
where he, because I've got one of those weird little it's like a peg octopus.
yeah,
It's a little peg. So I was like, yeah, I just peg the inside of a sock because it doesn't work
yeah,
otherwise. But then I thought
yeah.
about it. I was like, oh yeah, of course I don't peg two sides because it's thicker and won't dry. So there we go. So we have established that we're all very smart and efficient when it comes to how we hang our clothes to dry.
Indeed,
It
indeed we
popped in my
are.
mind because I put my washing out this morning. I always think about it every time I put socks on the line. Um, but then as I was doing a call earlier, it started raining, and I'm like, brilliant. So now all my
Socks
in
will
the
be,
one shower we've had in a week was when my
yeah,
washing
isn't
was
it?
out and I couldn't go and get it.
That is how weather works. It lives to frustrate your washing.
Yeah, it waited until the call started, and then it was like, she's on, lads, go.
I thought, isn't it hot there today? Or has
Yeah,
it cooled
it
down
is.
a bit?
It's cloudy and windy,
Okay.
but it's muggy hot, like sticky hot.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. It's a bit
Kind
poo.
of tropical, really.
Yeah. I like dry heat. I like the kind of heat. I'm a sweaty top lip person. So
Mm. Mm.
I just don't like the hotness.
I like summer in England because it's not usually sticky compared with here in
Yeah.
August, which is very humid. Like the relative humidity here is always high 80s.
Wow.
So that, I mean, that's the standard.
Yeah, that's hot.
So
That's
yeah.
sticky hot.
Okay, I've
Okay, good.
relaxed now. I really have relaxed now. So
Hey,
that
there
thought
you go.
question worked.
Pigs on a washing line. Turns out, great start.
Yeah.
So, and
So
I hopefully you don't think you can hear it now, but my cat started yelling downstairs. But
don't
Zoom's
hear the cat.
awesome. Zoom's usually pretty good
I'm
at keeping it. She will probably come and join us in a bit then as well.
very grateful that there are no weed whackers outside today because you just never know in the Caribbean. A weed whacker can start at any time, especially when you're doing a podcast recording.
Yeah, too. Now, a weed whacker to you, would that be what I call a strimmer?
It's a, it's like a strimmer, yes. Which I used to call a strimmer, but I've now been in the back in the Caribbean for so long that I'm calling it a weed whacker now. Unless I'm in England, in which case I call it a strimmer.
Got a strimmer. I know in the
Like
States they call
I
it a
move
weed
between the
eater,
two.
don't they? And I was like,
Well,
in the
ooh.
States it's a weed
Yeah,
eater. And
yeah.
someone was talking, I was like, oh, what?
Weird, weird.
There you go.
Two
So
countries divided by common language.
indeed. And what a perfect stepping off point, really, to kind of get into our conversations. She says, segueing in it, like with a bit of a hard right turn.
Yeah,
Um,
didn't see that coming at all.
seamless, seamless. No,
Absolutely.
but it is interesting, isn't it, really? Because actually that's kind of the basis of so many things, isn't it? You know, we all do things, even if we do them in the same way, it's different. We call it something different. We have different experiences, right? And
For
and
sure.
I've been learning so much from specifically from you in terms of Sharon's anti-racism newsletter, which we'll make sure we put a link to in the show notes for anybody who's interested in listening to thinking, oh yeah, actually I'd like a regular dose of learning. But really just understanding from your perspective things that go on in your life that absolutely wouldn't occur to me because they're just not things that ever happen to me in my life. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of those, I was gonna say it's not like joyous, but it's kind of like enlightening. I think that's the word I'm going. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's like you realize the differences, and it's one of those things you would never know unless someone told you because it's just not part of your frame of reference. But then it gets me thinking that like I'm fairly certain you didn't go to school thinking I'm going to tell everybody about the differences in my life compared to
I
theirs.
did not. I did
Oddly
not. I
enough.
did. I certainly did not. And if you would ask me, in fact, if I mean the newsletter's going to be 5 years old in August, and if you would ask me in early 2020 if this was something I was going to do, I wouldn't even have thought that this was what I was going to do. I
Right.
mean, when I was at school, I had a couple of career options in mind. One of which, because I was good at languages, so I did French and Spanish to a bachelor's level. And so I thought about becoming an interpreter, um, mainly because they were well paid and got to travel. And I also applied for like a tour guide job and things like that. Didn't get it. Didn't have the look apparently, but that's a whole other thing.
Well, I was going to say, what does that mean?
Well, it's interesting actually because it kind of relates to the newsletter in that one of the things that you'll have seen me talk about is the post-colonial setting and how in societies where enslavement was a factor, you still have these white supremacist norms.
Mhm.
And so I had I had braids in my head when I went for the interview. And they said, you're going to have to take those out if you're coming to work here. Right? And so, and this was in Barbados. My interviewer was a white Canadian woman, I think. But honestly, that was actually neither here nor there in terms of the standard at the time. There was definitely a feeling that, when I think about my aunts and the older generation, they had their hair straightened, they would make it as European-like as possible
Yeah.
to fit in with what was expected to be professional,
Yeah.
right? And so that started to change in the 70s for some people, but it was still hanging around in the 80s, and I'm sure I'd almost put money on it that there's still places that will expect a certain look because boy, do people love to control how women look, how black people look, all of these kinds of things.
For
But
sure.
anyway, all that being said, I had no idea that I was going to end up doing a newsletter. Um, I it wasn't even a thought in my eye. actually went into journalism
Okay.
eventually. And so I worked very briefly in the Caribbean, and then the bulk of my journalism career was as a trade journalist in the UK. So I worked for a magazine, a little known magazine called Metal Bulletin,
Okay.
right? which was which was well thought of, I have to say, within the industry. There's a you know the sister company did the pricing for metals on the market, and so this was a monthly magazine, sort of humanizing the companies and talking about what they were doing, right? So I worked on that, and then I worked for the National Youth Agency. I worked for the Design and Technology Association, and so this was all related to journalism. And then I started teaching at Coventry University, also because I had been a journalist and they wanted to start a program there. So, I did BA courses. I helped put together a master's in specialist journalism. And so I did that for a while. So all of this was happening. You could say that the seeds of the newsletter were maybe sown when I was doing a master's at Coventry in media and culture, and I chose for my topic shadism, which we now know as colorism, which is
Okay.
discrimination on the basis of skin shade. For those listeners who are not aware, viewers and listeners who are not aware, and so I did that as my topic. Um, and then I finished that and I put it away, and then I moved to Barbados. Um, And then fast forward quite a long way. I was a freelance writer, mostly writing about digital marketing things, right? Content, SEO, analytics, social media, etc., etc.
Mm.
I was good at it too. But I think what happened is George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
And like for many of us, that was a catalytic moment in many ways. And it made me think about a lot of the experiences I have had in the workplace in the UK,
Yeah.
and the way that Black people are often perceived to be wrong, out of place, a threat, and so on. So I wrote two essays, I think, in a short space. One was called I'm Tired of Racism, which later became the title of my book. And the
Yes.
other was called um, Thoughts on the Assumption of Wrongness. And
Ooh.
I published those on Medium. But interestingly, because most of my audience, because I had worked mostly with people in the US, most of my audience was American, right? And so I was getting a lot of responses to that. And I realized that I had bottled up a lot of things and I still had a lot to say.
Mm.
So that eventually led to the newsletter.
Yeah. So
Eventually led to the
almost the regular
newsletter.
stream of the things that you were starting to
Yes,
notice and realizing that actually people need to
yes.
hear this and I need to say this.
Yes, absolutely. It was, we introverts tend to be very quiet types, right? And I found my voice and I used it for something necessary.
Yeah, wow. Didn't you just? Because I know, yeah, there are a lot of people I speak to that subscribe to your newsletter and have copies of your book. And
Ooh,
again,
ooh.
that's going to be in the show notes again, so it's I'm Tired of Racism.
Yes, it is.
Um, and what was the other title of the other article essay that you did on Medium?
Um,
Thought thoughts
I
on
think it was called, yeah, okay. Actually, it was called While Black, Thoughts on the Assumption of Wrongness. And I think it's in the book, actually. I
yeah,
think it's in the book now. Um,
okay.
so
So if
yes,
people buy the book, they can get all of it then. Yeah,
they can get quite a bit of it.
Yeah,
The book is a bit of a snapshot of the newsletter,
yeah,
which came about because someone said, I can't do two issues of the newsletter every week, but if you had a collection, I would read it. I said, oh, okay, I'll do a book then. I thought to myself, as you do,
makes
right?
sense. Yeah,
As you do. And so that's how the book came together. And it does include a couple of pieces that were never in the newsletter. Because I always feel like, if you've a collection is great, but I want the people who have invested in the book to also get something
yeah.
in return for investing in the book.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely. No, I think that yeah, that
yeah,
makes sense, doesn't it? To give people more of stuff that you know that they already want and then some
absolutely,
more because they're with you on the journey with you.
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if we can loop back a little bit, because I was really curious when you were talking about colorism, And it's a topic that came up on my podcast just a couple of weeks ago. So for people that listen regularly, they'll have they'll have listened to my conversation with Era Fakoka, and
Hmm.
she is a Nigerian woman, and she runs I always want to call it a recruitment agency, but it's not that. It's like remote offshore work placements.
Hmm.
But essentially it works like a recruitment agency. But we were talking about how culturally in the West, because she predominantly supplies, I think, into the UK and the US, um, people seem to have normalized the idea of offshoring talent from India or
Hmm.
from kind of other places. But when she now talks about she specifically supplies people from Africa, she gets met with a lot of resistance that she wasn't getting,
Mm.
that people don't get from other places. So we,
Ooh.
yeah, right. So we kind of touched on, now she was very um polite, I get one polite, diplomatic in her conversation around it, because I also understand she has a lot of potential clients that she's, has to manage.
Yeah,
And I was a little less diplomatic, and I just said, come on, like, it's racism, that's what we're talking about here.
anti-Blackness.
Exactly, anti-black racism. So, and so we it was interesting because I kind of, and even I myself had to, it was a point of attention, which people, again, people who listen to the episode will know this, that I had to sit with my reluctance to out and out ask the question of her, because I could see she was, and from previous conversations, I knew she may not want to go there, but part of me was like, it
Yeah,
doesn't feel right to not call it what it is.
yeah.
And that was kind of an interesting dance,
Mm.
let's say. But it got to the point where we'd wrap the episode, and I left it recording, and I said, look, I just need to ask you outright, and then if you're okay with it, we'll leave it in. And then we had a conversation, and she was fine with it, and we left it in. um
Yeah.
but I guess, obviously, given that you maybe don't have the same
No.
client dynamic that she does, can you tell me your thoughts perhaps on that, or on other examples of your own around kind of anti-black
Oh
colorism,
my
racism?
gosh. Anti-Blackness is rife. And it's a big element of racism. Obviously, racism can apply to other groups as well. But there's this whole narrative that had to be created in order to make it okay for people to feel it was okay to enslave people. And so that is a centuries old narrative that is woven through so many things that people don't even see it or question it, right? That is in some of the language that we use, you know, that is, you know, black hat, white hat, for example, right? There's this idea that something that is associated with blackness is dark. Joseph Conrad, what was his book? Heart of Darkness, Heart of Darkness,
Right.
about Africa, right? And so there's this whole narrative that has been created and reinforced through literature, through media, that somehow, you know, there's something wrong, inferior, bad, terrible. And from the point of view of the colonizers, this was justification, uncivilized, yes, that was justification for them coming and undoing centuries of other, civilizations and replacing it with what they had and disconnecting people from their heritage. Um, but that anti-blackness has not gone away. It
Yeah.
hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
And even from the point of view of, if someone comes up to you at the bus stop and that person is black, do you huddle to one side and grab your bag? Right? I've had that happen to me because I had short hair and broad shoulders. So, and I was wearing a winter coat at the time. So the lady in question didn't know, who I was. But, I see it all the time, and it's still going on. I
Mm.
noticed it. When was the last time I noticed it? I was in Manchester, actually. I was waiting for a department store to open, and there were a bunch of us sort of leaning on a railing opposite the department store. And, people would come and, someone came, they stood next to this guy, and he was fine, you're right, white people. And I came after a while, a gap opened up, and I went and then he just moved off to one side. And so it was noticeable. the difference in how people treated me
Mm.
versus those other people, right? All waiting for the store. Nobody's doing anything, nobody's chatting or anything. All I was doing was leaning on a railing, but there was a difference in treatment, you know. Um, and then, from the colorism point of view, of course, that also comes down to well, that plantocracy heritage from I don't know if you're familiar with the what they call the plantocracy, which is a society that existed on plantations where people were enslaved. White people at the top, people racialized as white because it's all made up, right?
Yep.
And people racialized as black at the bottom, and then shades in between depending on your position in society and the shade of your skin.
Yep.
And so there was no doubt that the closer you got to the European ideal, the more social mobility you had. And so that accounts for things like the hair story I was talking about. That accounts for the use of skin lightening creams in some societies. That accounts for a lot of things. That accounts for, I remember that certainly in my grandfather's time, if you wanted a job or as a teacher in insurance in the bank, your skin had to be a certain shade, and it wasn't mine. It was a
Mm.
lot lighter, right? And I mean that has changed, but there's still vestiges of it here and
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah.
Because those ingrained centuries old things, those epigenetic attitudes don't disappear just because you've written a piece of paper and said, okay, now everything's okay.
Yeah.
And especially if you're not living that. I mean, people can write pieces of paper, but people can make laws, and it's better than not having the laws. But then day to day people have to be living in a way that recognizes the humanity in everyone. And a lot of people are
Yep.
not. They're just not.
Yeah. And I guess, and there's levels, right, isn't there? Because like you say, there will be that element of, and it's when you were talking about that, something that comes up is people use terms like proximity to whiteness, right? Which can
Mm-hmm.
be quite
Mm.
triggering for people who are racialized as white, because we don't like to think of ourselves as being racialized until you stop,
You're
like you
not.
said, and we think about the fact that it's all made up. It is literally
It's
all made
all
up.
made up.
And who was it made up in favor of? The people doing the making up.
Exactly, which is hardly a
It's all
surprise,
history
really.
ever
It's
is.
hardly a surprise. Because when people go back in history, there, I mean, there weren't, white people didn't exist. I mean, I can't remember what century it is now. 13th, 14th, 15th century, sometime around then, around the time that the Europeans started exploring and going out to places, around the time that they started thinking, okay, you know, here are these people minding their own business that we have discovered, right? Yes.
Because they weren't
Or rather,
there
those
doing their own
those
thing,
those
minding
people
their own.
those people discovered the Europeans sailing onto their islands. That's what happened. That was the real act of discovery, right? And then they saw societies, and they saw wealth, and they saw all these things, and they saw societies. I mean, this is I'm not. I don't think there's any society that was ever perfect, right? But I also think that there was a little more harmony with planet and people. And then they came in and they said, "Oh, we'll have some of that, and we'll have some of that, and you don't, you're black, you're brown, you don't deserve to have this. You're uncivilized. You're not doing things the way we do them, right?" And yeah, so they invented whiteness. They invented pseudoscience, eugenics, to support their idea.
Yeah.
And they did all kinds of horrible things in order to support this idea,
Mm,
you know.
yeah. Yeah, because when you think about it as humans, I think most rational people um genuinely couldn't stomach the suffering of another human person, right? On the whole,
On the
we're
whole.
just not wired to be able to stomach that. And yet,
And yet,
yeah, the our, our society has a way of creating situations where, like you say, we can rationalize it. We can distance ourselves from it in so many ways. And
the way you do that The way you do that is by deciding that some people are less human than others. As simple
Hmm.
as that. It's the
Yep.
dehumanization. Once you decide that somebody is savage, an animal, uncivilized,
Mm.
then isn't it, by to their lights, it's their duty to do something about it.
Wow.
And then
Yeah.
they don't owe anything. And I mean, it's a narrative that, I mean, you see it replicated everywhere that the colonizers went. And, the Brits did their share, more than their share, went to, I think, I
I
think Brits
think. Yep.
colonized like 200 different countries at one
Yep.
point, right?
I think we're a
Something
major
that
player in the game. Yep.
major player in the game, which is really interesting because I know that, often when you teach history in England, it's like, these things happen, but look, we abolished slavery. Right?
Ignore this
Nothing.
period when we were
Yes.
really awful. Don't look at that.
Yeah.
Which is
Look
why
at
we
the
have to have conversations like this, though, isn't it? Because
it
we're not
is.
learning how, and that's something that absolutely boggles my mind, is we're just not learning how we've arrived at where we've arrived at. Because if we
Yes.
could understand that, we can
Yes.
unpick it.
And also look at the, don't see every instance as a discrete case. Because if you look at it, the Brits had the same playbook in Canada with the Indigenous people, in the US with the Indigenous people, in Australia with the Indigenous
Yeah.
people, in the Caribbean with the Indigenous people they found, right? The idea was let's come here and let's either wipe them out or enslave them.
Mm,
And, and by the way, just as a bonus, we'll bring some disease with us. So, what the work doesn't get, the disease will,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You
A-
know?
And that then comes back to that whole, like, the individualistic perspective of whatever the thing was that we in our European minds were thinking was, this is the new way to be. This,
Yeah,
well, we'll call it exploring. I'm doing quote unquote marks and
yeah,
people, like, because that's what the Europeans would have labeled it.
yeah,
um this is it's almost like the space race, isn't it, but for
yeah.
land, right? It was a land grab,
Yes, yes,
essentially,
it
of like,
is.
we need
It is.
this and we're doing it in the name of probably monarchy, is likely, or
Yeah.
religion. It's going to be one or the other. We're doing it in the name of a thing that we believe to be greater than
Than
ourselves,
whatever else is
therefore it's a
actually
call it,
there.
and
Yes,
we tell ourselves numerous stories to justify the ends, which is, well, now, we are quote unquote empire, um and we have literally taken, stolen, stuck a
yeah.
flag in it, called it ours, and
And then the empire becomes its own justification,
yeah, and now
going sort
we've
of way.
subjects to control, and
Yeah,
what's the word, like, kind of, take, again, quote unquote, take care of. There are subjects, whatever, and it's like, and
yeah,
yeah, and it's so problem, but we don't. I think the generally, as a society, we're getting better at having this conversation, because I think we're starting to, I guess, be unable to look at our own history in the face and go, oh yeah, actually that was really shit, and not feel immediate kind of individual responsibility for that, because it's
yeah.
it's like, I didn't
But
do that. However, I have to understand it. I have to
yeah,
understand how it's made me who I am today, because my entire state of being is built on the framework that
yes,
that comes from that.
the, yes, the wealth of many, many countries in Europe is built on exploitation, extraction, and genocide,
Yeah.
right? And you kind of have to look that in the face,
Yeah.
and not try to skirt around it, which so many people. And if you look at the history, I mean, in the UK of things like Lloyd's of London, where did they start insuring? Right? What were those first cargoes they were actually insuring? I
Mm,
do wonder, right? If you look at, I mean, The Guardian, I think last year did a whole thing about its implication in the trade in enslaved Africans, right? If you look at all the major ports, Liverpool, for example. which has an excellent museum, by the way, which on the history of enslavement, which I've been to, and was really, really good, right? Um, when you start to look at the wealthy cities, especially the port cities, when you start to look at the wealthy families, when you look at the people in the Caribbean who have last names that are similar to prominent people in the UK or any other parts of Europe, you know, there's a straight line between those two
Or by
things.
accident, yeah.
It is not by accident at all. It is not by accident. And
Yeah.
so, you know, you have to look at those things and then you have to do better. And you have to recognize that even, you personally might not have done a thing, but somewhere along the line, the way that the society runs and operates benefited you and the way you are able to be today. And so then your question becomes, okay, with that knowledge, what is my responsibility now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can imagine there are some people that I think I've put it this way, I've heard people rationalize it and say, well, that
Mhm.
was then and this is now. Why can't we draw a line under it? Because
Mhm.
none of that's going on now. We're not enslaving people now.
Mhm.
You know. Mm.
Yeah.
But there's it can be presented as quite a rational, logical argument to say, actually, we are not the same people we used to be. We are not our ancestors. Why can't we draw a line in it and just start
But
again?
but then the question is, given that a certain group of people have been discriminated against for so many centuries, when we draw a line, where are we starting in relative terms,
Yeah,
right? Where are
yeah,
we actually starting, right? Why is it, for example, I often think about this in relation to Barbados and the Caribbean, in that the people that were the enslavers got compensated when it ended. The people who had been enslaved got nothing, which is why
mm,
they keep talking about reparations.
reparations.
The whole world order is set up to reinforce this idea that you have to be enthralled to the instruments of whiteness, right? You know, the World Bank, the IMF, all of those things. It's like, yeah, let's lend these countries that can't seem to manage themselves because we extracted everything. Let's lend them money at an exorbitant rate and have them in hock to us for the rest of their natural, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I
It's
mean,
almost like if
yeah,
you get like three-quarters of the way through a game of Monopoly and
yeah,
someone's got everything and there are several other people who are also in that game. They've probably got one of a couple of the colors, but they've not got a set. And
uh,
the person who's literally got the monopoly says, "Do you know what? We'll call it a draw for this game. We'll start a new game, but we'll start the new game exactly where we're finishing this one, yeah?
yeah.
And
So
then
I'm keeping everything
we'll
I've got,
declare the
right?
winner."
I read an interesting fact about Monopoly the other day, which was that it was intended to show the evils of greed originally, right?
And it
It
does.
was it was not intended to make greed a good thing, right?
I mean, who
And
can
there was
get through like a
apparently,
family, Christmas or whatever if they're going to play Monopoly? Like it tears families apart.
yeah, literally, it was really interesting. In fact, apparently the person that invented it had another version of the game that worked on cooperation, but that was not the one that became popular.
Yeah, that's sad.
I can't remember where I read that, but I read it in the last couple of weeks.
Do you know what? I'm going to put that in as a fact check and I'll have a look
Yeah,
because honestly, isn't that just the perfect kind of metaphor? If it's even a metaphor, it's not even a metaphor, is it? It's real. And a
yeah.
direct example of just how society functions. That if there's an opportunity for us to get ourselves ahead, we're taking
Mhm.
it. And
And
that,
I
that's all that, but that's it. That's the Western, like, European model, essentially, isn't it?
it
Of
is, it is,
competition
and
rather than
it's not doing us any favors. It really is. I mean, look at the state of the planet, right? That because You know, when you read about indigenous communities and indigenous history, they tended to work in harmony with the planet. You know, they wouldn't so that they wouldn't exhaust the resources, right? They would, they like I think in one case I remember reading about I can't remember whether it was the Kalinago or the Taino in the Caribbean, and they moved on a 7-year cycle, moving to different places so that by the time they came back around 7 years later, the land had had a chance to recover, right? They didn't extract everything, so everything was completely exhausted.
Yeah,
And that is what colonialism, capitalism, that's what that
yeah,
does.
yeah.
And don't even get me started on patriarchy, but anyway.
But it's the holy trinity of destruction, isn't it, really? And
The unholy
they
trinity.
they work so perfectly with one another to reinforce each other, making it seemingly impossible. Although I find it interesting, and actually I recorded a podcast with a guest um last week, and she was kind of talking about going back to more kind of holistic. So she's a birth trauma specialist, but she's talking about helping people who have babies go back to kind of more holistic methods and ways of coping with the trauma of childbirth. And as we were talking, I just said, yeah, but this is something that, indigenous communities will have always been
Yeah,
practicing.
yeah.
And it's just we've overly
So
medicalized things away
we have.
from a lot of that.
But the other casualty of that is that we have been taught not to value indigenous knowledge. So even when people are doing these things, it's like they're reinventing the wheel when they don't need to. They're not going back to the people that actually have this and have probably passed down their knowledge for generations. They're not going back to saying teachers. They're assuming that, they have to do something new.
Yeah. It immediately just said as well, like things like yoga spring to mind, where
Oh,
it's like
yeah,
it's just been repackaged as a commercial
yeah,
entity rather
yeah,
than, the kind of
yeah.
energetic spiritual connection, what, the roots of
And then you think about alternative medicine, which is more like original medicine,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right?
Before pharmaceutical manufacturing organizations existed, just like we had
Exactly.
plants.
Before people decided that this thing had to be profitable. It's like the tentacles are just everywhere, Katie. It's like,
Yeah,
the profit motive is so inhumane. And this is not to say it always bothers me that, there's enough on the planet for everyone, but people are living in poverty and people are unhoused,
yeah.
right? Um, yeah, and as I said, I said in another meeting today, people are sending giant aubergines into space.
Yeah.
Right?
But
You
that's
know?
that's where we're at. That's what's happened with this kind of sort of
Yeah.
really bonkers way of how as a species we've evolved. We're supposed to be so smart,
Mhm.
and it's almost like we're too smart to cope. So we've just almost over evolved out the other side into just sheer
Yeah.
bizarreness.
It's completely bizarre. It's like you could have you could have wiped out world hunger with that money.
Yeah,
You could have made sure everybody had a modest home.
yeah,
But no, this is
yeah.
what you're
Everybody
doing.
could have clean access to clean water.
Yeah, but no. Let's go out and colonize somewhere else
Yeah.
because it worked so well the last time.
Yeah, I did completely as well, like sideways, but I read I think it's in the book Citizen, and I cannot remember the author's name, and that's going to annoy me. But where the author talks about how we've moved from states of being subjects to consumers, and the next phase should be citizens, which is almost going full circle back to community. And let me write that down because I'll make sure I put the author's name in the show notes as well because I feel bad for not
Yeah.
remembering. Um, but yeah, it was just almost that kind of, oh God, I've got menopause brain. I've forgotten the point I was going to make now.
Don't worry about it. It'll come back. It'll come back.
You know, honestly,
Or maybe
sometimes
it
it
won't.
doesn't.
But
I used to say it will come back. It's not so reliable anymore. But it was going to be something along the lines of, oh, that was it, about how when they were talking about the closest that you can get now to kind of um like modern societies, like the way in which countries and their democratic systems and stuff have evolved to, or become, and the closest you can get to kind of the citizen model that he's talking about is Taiwan, I think he was talking about, and the way
Mhm.
in which they kind of elect and operate. And he says that how interestingly a lot of people banned about New Zealand when it was Jacinda Ardern as being like the shiny gold star, which of course has gone, they've taken a hard right turn as well, haven't they, recently? But
Yes.
he just said essentially that has now become the new playground for the super wealthy to buy up massive amounts of land, like 400-acre plots, build underground nuclear proof bunkers, and they're just getting themselves ready for a future that they're going to create. And I just thought that's reassuring, isn't it? Like, you're just going to take,
Yeah.
pick somewhere beautiful and remote, make it so that only a few people can survive there, screw the rest of the planet, and they're going to go and create their underground silos. Um,
That's colonialism.
yeah,
I
isn't it?
mean, sure, they sailed halfway around the world to do the same thing, but that's what they did. They found places they thought were nice. They set up themselves there. They got rid of whoever was there before, and they made it work for them. But
Yeah,
they didn't care what happened to anybody else. So I don't think that has changed, Katie. I
yeah,
really don't. I think,
yeah,
I think when you think about it, it's all part of the same malign paradigm, right?
yeah.
It really is,
The
which,
wheel keeps
again
running.
brings us back to, racism and justifying the oppression of different peoples, right? And so when you think of all the conflicts going on in the world, they're all coming out of that idea that it was all
Yeah,
right for somebody far away to decide what happened in another place in opposition to the will of the people that were actually there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the ripple effect is that when I'm at a bus stop and you come and stand next to me, I don't know why I have this almost unconscious, uncontrollable urge to clutch my handbag and move away. You
Well,
know,
I'll tell you how it works for me though, right? I could always guarantee that I would always when I got on a bus, nobody would sit next to me unless it was absolutely necessary. So I always had two seats to myself. And okay, that's not cool, but on the other hand, I had two seats to myself. Right?
I love that you're
So
going like, take the win.
I mean, it is the reason why it happens is not cool, but it's so there's so many ways in which this thing plays out. I mean, we haven't even talked about saviorism.
Oh, let's get into that.
We have not even talked about saviorism. I
Before you get into that, though, I do just want to say, for the purposes of people that are listening audio only, I probably should say in the bus stop example that I gave there as well is like, I'm a person racialized as white, you're a person racialized as black. Because
yeah,
I'm sure people were with us as I was describing that in
yeah,
their minds, but just in case it was not clear, that was my point.
for sure, for sure. No, it's really, really interesting. I remember working with someone, a woman racialized as white, and she was very helpful. I had moved to the area, and she was very helpful with all kinds of things until I found my feet in the area, and then all of a sudden she got really cool and slightly unfriendly. And it's like she was only interested when she could help me because that made her out to be superior,
Wow, yeah.
right? And so, yeah, that was white saviorism in action. And it happens. I mean, a lot of charity work, a lot of, what are the images that we see of the countries? Because I often think, right, everybody has seen those pictures of starving children in Africa that have been used to guilt generations, right?
Yeah.
There are starving people in every country, children, right? And I'm not saying that because I honestly believe that a lot of the problems in some of the formerly colonized countries are because of the depredations of the colonizers, and they should be made up for. But I also, I also think that that kind of representation is not good representation, because then you also think. I had a conversation with a Nigerian friend years ago, and she said, people see those images and they think that is Africa. Africa is
Mm.
huge. It has many countries. It has people doing multiple things. It has an ancient history. And she said, I had to show them literal pictures of my father's seven-bedroom mansion before they would believe I had not been one of those children, right?
Yeah. But it comes back to what was in the news recently, isn't it, with Donald Trump and his comment to
Oh,
the president or
Liberia?
prime minister of Liberia.
Liberia?
Yeah,
Yes. Yes,
like
about
you
speaking
speak
English
such
very well.
beautiful English, where it's almost like,
Mm.
yeah, it's colonized nation and it's our national language. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, I had a similar thing I wrote about in the newsletter recently, where somebody asked, so why isn't your name, I'm disappointed that your name isn't more ethnic. And I said, well, colonization. I mean, you know, we
Yeah.
didn't get to keep our names, or, the names that our forebears had.
Yeah.
It's like, why is that a surprise to you?
Yeah.
And what does that say about what your image is of Black people? And I think that's a question more people racialized as white need to ask themselves.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think you know? What do you think? What do you believe about
Mm.
people racialized as Black that you're not even admitting to yourself?
Yeah. And sometimes that's even the
Right?
hardest thing, isn't it, to actually, because as a white person myself, like we love to have the whole I'm not racist, because we're taught that racism is bad, and I have this whole
Mm,
narrative about myself that I'm not a bad person, I'm a good person. And therefore I have to tell myself more stories to reinforce that narrative,
yeah.
rather than sitting with the truth, which is I'm racialized as white and I grew up in a society that prioritized whiteness and
Mhm.
taught me to see the world through that lens. So absolutely I'm racist. Like it's in me. I
So
have to be,
yeah,
I have to pay attention.
I quote there's a singer called Guante whom I quote often, and
How are we
he
spelling
said
that? Sorry.
Guante, and he says, and this is why I quote it often, racism isn't the shark, it's the water,
Yeah.
right? It's like that whole the groundwater theory or whatever it is, right? If the water is poisoned, then everything else that comes out of it is going to be a little tainted,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And
and and, and importantly, that also applies to people racialized as Black in formerly colonized countries,
yeah.
bringing it back to what we were talking about before. And
Yeah.
so all of us have a lot of unlearning to do.
Yeah.
All of us, as people racialized as Black, we have to learn to love ourselves as we are. We have to unlearn prioritizing Europeanness, to give it a term, right, and whiteness. Um, and then similarly, as people racialized as white, you have to unlearn thinking that that is the best and only thing to do, and everything else is somehow very inferior, right?
Yeah.
Or that the color of your skin, what's on the outside, makes you inherently better than everybody else,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
sometimes for us, we have to unlearn that the color of our skin makes, sometimes we have to not feel inferior, you know. For me, I mean, I grew up in a Black majority country, even though I was born in England, but I grew up in the Caribbean. Um, and so I could see people around me filling every role. I mean, it's not perfect because as per what we said earlier, the people with the most financial muscle are people racialized as white whose families own plantations and who still have a lot of money, right? Still own a lot of things. Having said that, being able to see people around me filling every role gave me a different sense of self. But when you don't see those people around you and you get bombarded with messages that suggest that there's something wrong with you being the way you are,
Yeah.
but that also had to be unlearned, that's something that has to be unlearned. And I know, my parents definitely went through a hole in the 70s, Black is beautiful, you know, you know, even down to the kind of music that was listened to and that kind of thing. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it's an act of will to
Yeah.
unlearn the messages that bombard us, to unlearn what we are taught about ourselves, and to always aim to see the humanity in each other, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, yeah, that's a hard thing to do, because
It can be, yeah.
it's asking us to really be present, pay attention, question, think critically, like challenge
Sure.
ourselves to be like, is that true? Is that right? Is that like, and you can tie yourself in knots sometimes, but I almost, like, personally, I think it's worth it, because even if you come out the other side and go, sometimes not knowing is like, it's okay to not
Mhm.
know. Sometimes you don't get an answer. And sometimes
Yeah,
I find myself telling myself, well, it might be the case for now until I learn something else or I'm presented with something new, and then it might not be the case, and you just have to be all right with it. Like,
my friend Linda, who does a really good tech newsletter called Linda Be Learning, but
okay,
she says her question is, who told you that and why did you believe it? Right? And so often I started an anti-racism community last year. It's quite small. There's 16 of us in it, right? And it's got a reparations element built in. So, some of the a portion, 10% of the subscription membership fees goes into a pot so that we can support other people. We have an accountability thread. But one of the things that we're always saying is, we have to learn to question ourselves. We need to think about where the ideas that we have about the world come from.
yeah,
And having said that, as Black people, we learn ideas about whiteness too, and about white people, and you know, this is why some people may not always feel safe. This is why, if you are trusted, that is a huge thing, right? Because the history of the world shows that if you are racialized as Black, whiteness will often harm you, right?
yeah,
If
yeah,
you are a person of the global majority as well, this is not just about Black people, someone with brown skin, you know, or anybody who's not racialized as white actually can be subject to harm, can be subject to microaggressions, can be subject to discrimination, you know, and we can see that hasn't gone anywhere. Look at narratives around migration. Look at concentration camps being actually built in our time, in our lifetime, in front of our
yes,
very eyes. Because what else would you call that?
yeah,
Look, it's just the anti-blackness, the discrimination. It's there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And
mm,
as a Black person, I always knew it hadn't gone anywhere.
no,
Um, it's not to say that I lived my life in a way where I had to make a decision for myself, as we all must, about how I want to live,
mm,
right? And my decision about how I want to live is to avoid, as far as possible, discriminating against other people and doing harm to them, right? Even if harm has been done to me.
yeah,
But, some days it's not that easy. Some days it's not that easy.
yeah. Well,
Some days you think, what are these people on? It's like, why? Just why?
yeah. Well, and I can understand why, when, like, it takes a lot of energy to rise above. It takes a lot of energy to be humble. It takes a lot of energy to process your internal emotional experiences and regulate. Like, these things take a lot of energy. So I also get it in conversations that I have with people when they're just like, oh, it's just too much. I can't. I get it. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to go, this is too difficult for me.
It
Like
is, it
to
really
be
is.
able to go, no, I opt out is like,
What?
yeah,
Yeah, try being victim of racism. It's like, yeah, no. Um, yeah, I don't have a lot of time for the It's Too Hard doing brigade, I have to say. And this is not to say, I honestly believe that, as an anti-racist, sometimes you need to rest, but you can't give up. It's a
yeah.
lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. And actually, for me, as a former professional writer, the newsletter is not only a way to share things to help people learn things. It's catharsis as well. Sometimes,
Mm,
it's a way of processing things that happen.
yeah.
You know, um,
Yeah. And
but
and
yeah,
you do so very generously so that
thank
others,
you.
myself included, can learn because that's, to go back to my opening kind of points, you encounter scenarios and situations that will not present themselves to someone like me. Like it's just not going to happen. And on the one hand, I can spend time trying to imagine all of the things that I
Mm.
don't experience, which is, one thing, or I can shut up and listen to other people who very generously are happy to process and share those things. Because and I say this for people who have not read your newsletter or don't subscribe yet, that it doesn't come from a place of like stream of consciousness. Like you
No, 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 no,
you
no, no,
process
no.
and you share the insight and the learning and the reflection, and in a way that is
I'm a
is is
teacher at
is
heart.
healed. Exactly, yeah.
you know,
you know
but it's interesting actually because the newsletter has evolved a little bit over the years. 'Cause, it started with me just sharing those same stories, and I thought, okay, well, now what? When you've read those stories, what would I like you to do with them? Right. And so I started, putting in a little point of reflection or a little call to action, a little something, now that you know this, be more aware. How are you going to show up for your colleagues? That kind of question.
Mm,
And then I went from there to saying, well, it can't just be about, I wanted it to not just be about me, right? And so, um, that being said, some of the experiences I've had are shared by many people, many Black people. But also then I started interviewing people because I wanted it to be uplifting as well. I wanted people to say, well, here are people doing good things, right? It's not just because avoiding being the child with the flies, right? It has to be also, here's some good
yeah,
stuff that's actually
yeah,
happening. Here are some people, some brilliant Black and global majority people doing wonderful things to redress imbalances where they are.
yeah,
Learn from that too,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know. And then also, the one of the most popular bits is actually the reading list because
Yes,
I curate 10 plus articles every month. Um, I collect during the month as something comes up, and then I choose my top 10. And if there's something I started out when I first did it, I had lots and lots of articles, and I said, okay, that's too much for people. Let me get it back down to 10. And now I've added my little of notes section because there's always something where I don't necessarily want to do a long description, but I still feel like it's something people should be aware of. So,
yeah,
you know, and that was really because I think it's important to learn from multiple people, right?
yes,
And to hear multiple perspectives. And you will have seen me, I have put in perspectives that I don't necessarily share myself, or I've said, well, this is how I feel about it, but hear from this person.
is an alternative.
Then you make up your own mind,
Yeah,
right? It's trying not to gatekeep the knowledge in a way,
yeah, because
right?
it's
Now
that's
there's a
almost
paid subscription, but still, there's a lot of free stuff in the newsletter.
for sure, absolutely. And to your very point, that's one of the things that makes it so credible, which is it's not about persuading people into your perspective. It's just sharing perspectives. and giving people this is the true act of the anti-racism. It's like I give this to you, do with it what you will. You're in
Yeah.
charge. It's not for me to
Yes.
dictate anything. I take no ownership of you or your behavior or whatever you do. Be, literally be free, my pretty, get on with it. And
But of course, I hope that people are going to take it and they're going to talk to their colleagues and they'll share it with their
yeah,
families. And I know people do and have conversations about things they haven't thought about before. That is my hope. And so a better kind of ripple effect,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
will happen.
An informed ripple. And I think this is one of those
Mm,
things about why these conversations are so important, because certainly from my own learning perspective, once you start asking those types of questions, once you start peeling back the layers and having a look at some of the more uncomfortable stuff, or things that you just weren't aware of, you can't roll that back. Like you can't
yeah,
unknow things.
exactly.
So you are always
Easy, is
moving,
it?
you know? And I think that's kind of, it's not just a ripple, because with the tides come back again, and it's there's always forward momentum, and I think we need more of that, so that more people can have those moments of like, oh shit, I did not realize that, I did not see that, and now I do, and okay, I'm one step forward.
Yeah, yeah. I think you have to start somewhere. You have to be able to see it. Um, and once you're aware that it's happening, then maybe you do see it. Once
Yeah,
you see it, then it's like, okay, now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? Right?
yeah, well, it's like, red cars, isn't it? Until you've got a red car, you don't see red cars, and once you've got a red car, they are everywhere. And it is
For
that,
sure,
once,
for
is it the
sure.
reticular activating system, reticular something, the system in the base of our brain, which is wired in to recognize things that it recognizes.
Yeah,
Um, I'll have to fact check that to find out what that thing's called now. But yeah, like our brains are set up to notice stuff. So
absolutely, they are.
amass knowledge and learning, and pay attention. Yeah. We need to be bringing this baby into land now. So
Okay.
because I mean, I know otherwise I'll start another thread.
Yes.
Because I know there are so many things that we could have talked about that we haven't. So I'm probably going to invite you back on, and we could talk about introversion, because you went on, you kind of gave us a teaser and we've left it. So I feel like there's more that we can do in that.
I can
Um,
come back and talk about introversion. I'm happy to do that. I'm
Awesome.
very happy to
Good.
do that.
Good. Right, we'll get that in the diary then. But there are two things that I think were particularly important. One thing was just a phrase that I want to come back to make sure that there's an explanation for people who aren't familiar. So you use the term global majority.
Ah, yes. That was a phrase coined by Rosemary Campbell Stephens. I think that's the way around, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And she, a British scholar, and she basically said that, black and brown people are the majority of people on the planet, which is accurate. And so she coined the term people of the global majority. So, often you will hear me or you see me talk about global majority people. And it's a recognition because it often feels, especially if you're in a country like the UK or the US, like, there are all these white people around and, because, black and brown people are the minority population in that, but it's also a way to avoid things like terms minority because in fact we are the people of the global majority. And so it is accurate. It
Yeah.
is actually very interesting, though, that some white folks have feel very uncomfortable with that term because it shifts their worldview quite considerably from them being the center to being more the periphery.
Yeah. And I guess this is a really nice invitation then, for if anybody is noticing whilst listening or watching this, a little bit of resistance to that term, sit with that. We invite
Yeah,
you to sit with that, um,
for
and have a
sure.
chat with us if you want to.
Absolutely.
And then I think, just to revisit, because one thing that, a brilliant soundbite I think that you shared that I want to just revisit, is when you mentioned about making a decision about how I want to live. And I just think that for me encapsulates so much of this conversation, which is we are all in charge of how we want to go about conducting ourselves, and how we show up. And I think that was a really pertinent point, that what will people do as a result of having listened to this, and how will they decide that, that how do they want to take this forward, how do they want to live with this little piece of information?
I always feel like, if people just read the newsletter and do nothing with it, that's not quite enough. You know, what is the point of being more informed if you're not going to take more action? And so my hope for this episode, my hope for the newsletter is that when people have heard this conversation, that they're going to be inspired to learn more, to figure out where there's somewhere that they could make an improvement, and to do that thing and then repeat.
Perfect. Sharon Hurley Hall, is there anything that you came along wanting to say that you haven't had an opportunity to say?
I don't think so, Katie. I think it has been such a great conversation. I have really, really enjoyed it. Um, and I think, I want people to take away, don't just learn, act.
Perfect. And people can sign up to Sharon's anti-racism newsletter. There will be a link in the show notes, but I'm sure if you Google it as well, if you can't wait, that will take you straight there. So don't worry as well if you're, because I know most of my people listen to this in the car. So don't worry if you're listening along thinking, I can't remember all of the books and the resources and the things that were said. Don't worry, I've made a note. We're going to capture everything in the show notes. You can click the links until your heart is content. What is the best way in terms of socials or contact if people want to connect with you?
LinkedIn is the best place at the moment. I'm Sharon HH on LinkedIn. I am S. Hurley Hall on Instagram, though I'm not that active. Um, where else am I? Uh, you can find, I have a YouTube channel, which I believe is Sharon Hurley Hall. I say I believe because I had an older one, which was a different URL. But you can find links to everything pretty much on sharonhh.com.
Wonderful. So sharonhh.com. So if people
Yeah,
really want to get hold of you, head over to your website and they can connect with you on all mediums from that point.
absolutely.
Good. Wonderful. Sharon Hurley Hall, it's been amazing to have you along on the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. This has been a true pleasure and a delight. Oh, so
Oh, thank
great.
you. That was great.
Really enjoyed that conversation. So much fun.
Yeah, me too.
You
That was
would
really
not think that talking about racism could be fun, would you?
well. See,
But
but this for me, right? I think that if if we put aside the sheer horror of it all, which we
mm,
have to do for many, many things, it is interesting. Like, because it's a fact of life. Like,
it is.
it is interesting.
Gosh, yes. Because one of the things that I didn't, well, did we say that race was made up? We
Yeah,
did say that
we
somewhere,
did.
right?
Completely made up. Oh
Okay.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Okay,
weren't going to
good.
get through this episode without saying that. Totally made up. And this
All
is
right,
still
good.
recording. I might just clip this for good measure, stick it at the end and say, we said this. We said it, we
Yes.
meant it. It's all made up.
Yes.
And that is I think once you start to process stuff like that, all of like humans become fascinating. Like the way that we create systems and structures just to fuck each other over. Like,
I know. It's like race is made up, but racism is real.
yes.
And it's embedded in everything, as is anti-Blackness in a lot of things. And it's like, how can we do better? How could we do better?
Yeah.
By recognizing our humanity, each
Yeah.
other's humanity.